Welcome back. Things are slowly starting to piece together and they're starting to work. It feels good, doesn't it? And we're getting so close. And we have one last thing that we want to implement on the back end before we come back to the front end and do a few things, such as fixing this profile issue. Now, this token here is being sent to us. But we also want to make sure that whenever we receive this token from the client, we do some check on it. Because remember, in our sign-in function, we have written this silly little function called getAuthTokenID that just does a console log. And if we go back to our main function, that is sign-in authentication, we see that we check if the request.headers has authorization. And if they already do, then we can run getAuthTokenID because we don't want the user to sign in over and over. Otherwise, they have to run through the handle sign-in step, which already works for now. We checked and it's storing the information, creating the session in the Redis server, and returning the session information. So let's finish this off by having a getAuthTokenID. Now this naming should make sense. What we want to do here is actually get the token or get the ID from our Redis database. Remember, if I do get this token that we've created with our user, well, I want to receive the profile ID of 1 so that we're able to request and do a GET request to the profile. Remember, in our server.js, our endpoints, our goal is to have sign-in that just simply says, yeah, you're signed in, here's your token. And then once we receive the token, we send another GET request to actually get the profile ID. And because this sign-in authentication returns a token and an ID, remember, it returns an ID and a token, we're able to now get the profile with the ID that we received and giving the authorization header of the token. So that later on, when we make this a protected endpoint that only the valid auth token can access, we make sure that this works properly. So let's do that. I'm going to go to sign in, authentication, and fix the get auth token ID. This is going to be a nice, simple function. We're simply getting the value from our Redis database. We're going to say const authorization because we're going to receive that from our request.headers. And again, we're going to receive these objects. So in the get auth token ID, I'm going to pass the request response object to the get auth token ID. And in here, we should have access to them now. Now, with our Redis client, it is a simple method. Instead of set, we're going to use get, just like we did in Redis. And all we need to do now is give it the key, in our case, the authorization token. And the GET request is going to receive a callback function when it actually receives this with either an error or a reply. So you'll get a nil or an actual ID number. So let's create that callback function. And within this, we can do a quick check to say that if there's an error or maybe there's no reply, in that case, we can say return and we can do the response in here and add a .then, but just because we already have the handle sign-in and just to keep the clutter from happening, although I like keeping the responses within this function, for now, let's add the actual response in here. I'm going to say return response status of 400, and it's going to say unauthorized. Nice. Sounds very official. However, if everything works out, well, in that case, we want to return response.json with the ID, that is the reply that we receive. Remember, the reply is going to be the string of 1 that will be assigned to ID. So this way, our getAuthToken ID will get the authToken ID. And remember, because we're returning here, we want to make sure that this function actually returns something as well, in which case we add the return key here. So if we save this, we shouldn't get any errors. We have a syntax error. I lied. And yes, that's because we want to return an object here. Let's save that. All right, everything seems to be working. We're using getAuthTokenID. If I scroll down here, this should make sense now. Our sign-in authentication that goes to the sign-in endpoint is going to do one of two things. If the user sends an authorization token, we're going to just grab the user ID and send that response back. Remember, the response JSON with ID of the user. If there is no authorization token, then we're going to handle sign-in, check our passwords, use bcrypt and the database to check our passwords. If everything checks out, well, and we have an ID and an email, then we're going to create the session and actually create the token, set the token in our database. If it doesn't work, well, we just reject with an error. Otherwise, we're going to return the session with success true and a user ID and a token once again, so that at the end of both of these situations, the user ends up with an ID and token, so that in the future, and what we're going to implement in the next video, on the front end, we can use the .getRequest to get the profile. So with that, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.